Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud. My very, very special guest today is Carlotta Lanier, the youngest of the Little Rock Nine and the author of A Mighty Long Way. I am so pleased to have you here, Miss Lanier.
Well, thank you.
May I call you Carlotta?
Please do.
Okay. Did you have any idea, you're 12 years old, 1954, the Supreme Court rules that segregated schools are unconstitutional. Did you have any sense of how that was going to impact your life?
No, I did not. I just thought for sure that September of 1954 I would be going to my neighborhood school. That's how I envisioned it because we talked about it in my classroom. And I was very, very happy to hear that decision had been made. We talked about it because I came along during the time when we had a weekly reader, which was a newspaper for children. And that was on the front page. And our teacher, we discussed what was in the weekly reader. And all it did was validate the things that my parents had been telling me all along, that things were going to change. And even though I grew up, they didn't say it this way, but growing up in a Jim Crow South, certain things took place. And naturally, I questioned them, but I had also had the opportunity to see some things in other cities. And I knew that those changes would be welcomed in Little Rock with my community if it could be that way. So I kind of felt that all of this was opening of doors. And I had always been taught that if you have the opportunity to reach for that gold ring, you should do that. So, that's the piece that I saw it as change, a positive change that was taking place, even at 12 years of age.
Well, yeah, and then in just a few years you were in the position to volunteer to be one of the first 9 students to attend Central High School in Little Rock. And your parents didn't even know you had done this at first.
But, it was all about their teachings, too. So, no, I didn't run home and say I had signed a sheet of paper because, as I said before, I had expected that in 1954 that I would go to Lee Elementary School, which was right, or West Junior High School, which was right in my neighborhood. But, the school board had to put a plan in place to exercise this decision by the Supreme Court. And their plan took a couple of years. When it did happen, I was in my homeroom class, and Mr. Smith was just reading the bulletin, and halfway down he just stated, any of you who live, and he gave the street boundaries, have any intentions of going to Little Rock Central High School in the fall, please sign a sheet of paper. So when it got to me, I signed it and passed it on to the next person, didn't think another thing of it. It was not about teachers going around trying to convince any of us to do, it was a natural progression.
And this plan was called the Blossom Plan.
Blossom Plan.
And I wonder if you might speak to that.
Well, that plan was to build 2 new high schools, one on the east side of town, the other one on the west side, and integrate Little Rock Central High School. Well, you can imagine one side of town was predominantly black. The other side of town was more of the wealth, which was the west side. And so those 2 new high schools were being built in those 2 years. So some of the 9 went to Horace Mann, the new high school. But they signed up to go to Central because they lived in that school district as well. So I was in the 9th grade when all of this was finally taking place. So during my time, it was 7th, 8th, and 9th. That was junior high school, and then you went off to high school, which was 10th, 11th, and 12th.
That was the way it was for me, too. And I just wondered, though, with this Blossom Plan, as I was reading about it in your book, it struck me as it was sort of a way to delay integration.
Because to understand Brown versus Board of Education, there were really two decisions. The first one that said it was unconstitutional. They went and Jim Crow South went back and to the Supreme Court and say, well, when is this to happen? And then Brown versus Board of Education number 2 stated with all deliberate speed.
Okay.
Okay, so that's where you hear with all deliberate speed. Now, that depends on what speed you're on. Okay, so that gave the South and those who were had segregated schools leeway. And that was a part, and it basically you can say that, you know, a lot of people fall back on it today, you know.
No, good point.
But that phrase in Brown versus Board of Education was what a lot of school boards were looking for, because it was long into the 60s and 70s before a lot of schools in the South were ever integrated. But that was their deliberate speed.
What were your parents, how did they react when they learned that you had signed up for this really experiment?
Right. Well, they were proud. I could hear it in my mother's voice as she spoke to family members that Carlotta is going to Central in the fall. There was not a lot of discussion. And you have to understand, I came from a moderate city, which was the capital, and I think that's kind of how it was in the beginning, and a moderate state with a moderate governor. No one expected Governor Faubus to do what he did, other than that underlying toe of segregationists who stayed on him and guaranteed him a third term. See, it was not until I was well into my adult life that I really understood that this was more of a political agenda that was going on, not about what was right for the community and for the kids.
Well, I was thinking back as I read your book and trying to remember what it was like for me in 9th grade going on to high school.
Right.
It's an exciting time.
It's an exciting time.
And a little scary under any circumstances. What was it like for you the first time you were preparing to go to Central?
You hit it on the head. It was excitement, okay? I am going to my new school, and I'm going going to that neighborhood school, which was very well known throughout the country. It was ranked 34th in the nation. Now, you just stop and think about that. These are sort of things that you want to be a part of.
Sure.
You want to be able to put that on your application for those colleges outside of the South that you would like to go to, and open up your options. That was what it was really all about. That, along with the fact that I wanted to be a doctor. So, and I knew what was happening in those laboratory, the science labs there at Central as opposed to Horace Mann. But I was excited. See, I've always liked school. I've loved school. And school always started the day after Labor Day and finished up the day before Memorial Day. It was just the way of life.
And you had a new dress.
My uncle didn't want, my mother was an expert seamstress, but I'm going to Little Rock Central High School, and he came by the house and told my mother, you take her downtown and buy her a dress.
So you were all ready to go to school, and then you got there, and things didn't go like you had planned.
No, to be honest with you, I was a little shocked, because I had heard on the news the night before that the governor said that he was calling out the Arkansas National Guard to protect the citizens of Little Rock. I considered myself a citizen, and so in that naive thinking, I thought, and everything was fine. Now, I'm sure my parents probably were a little concerned because they were also seeing what was going on, but they were the youngest parents out of the group. And I'm the youngest out of the Little Rock 9. But I wanted to go to school, and they supported me. My mother drove me up to the point. We had gotten a phone call as to where to meet, and which was a block away from the school. And we drove up, and she saw two ministers that she knew well. One was one of our past ministers. So in the, she considered them God's ambassadors, I suppose, and thought and felt that I was safe. And basically I was. We met there at that point, and then we walked the one block up, and then that's when we discovered that we could not get into the school.
We're going to show that picture of you and two other students being stopped by the guards. What was going through your mind when that happened? Did you feel like your state and your country had turned on you?
Well, not at that point, okay? I saw them, and I felt that they were there to maintain that crowd across the street, okay? That was that 14-year-old thinking, that they were there to maintain that crowd, and that they would see to it that we could walk up the sidewalk and go on into the school. I had been in the school to register, so I had been there once before. So that was how I thought the scene was going to take place. But they continued to close ranks, and the commanding officer finally walked up and spoke to a white minister, because we had a number of ministers around us, and they were a part of the Little Rock Ministerial Alliance. It was an integrated group of ministers. And said to him that, Ernest asked him, you're telling me we cannot go? And he didn't want to really answer Ernie, but he spoke to the white minister. And he said, we're here to, no, they cannot go to school. And are you saying you're not here to protect them? You're not here to let them in? You cannot go. And Ernest said, what? And I kind of think I'm thinking the same thing.
Sure.
What are you saying? So then the ministers told us, okay, you won't be allowed to go today. Turn around and we'll go back home. And then that's when everything started happening.
Yeah,
the litigation,
all of it. It's very interesting. I was watching some old footage of Doris Kearns Goodwin, the historian, and she was talking about, as a young person, watching some of those scenes on television, because this was all on TV. And she said that was the first time she ever screamed at a president. She was screaming at Dwight D. Eisenhower through the TV, saying, get some help there, do something. Right. Were you feeling that yourself?
Well, yes, it's kind of funny. My friend Melba Beals, who was also one of the 9, had stated in a number of talks that she has had, in the past 25 years or so, have stated, when President Eisenhower finally, that he was her hero because he had sent in the 101st Airborne. My take on that is that what took you so long?
Well, exactly.
And so he's not my hero, but I do appreciate what he did. But it took 3 weeks to do that, or 2.5 weeks for him to see. My thinking was, as president, you can put this governor in his place. That's a 14-year-old thought process.
Of course.
And so, when are you going to do it?
Well, the great irony is your family had voted for Faubus.
Most definitely. He, like I said, he was a moderate governor, but when politics get involved, then all of a sudden things start changing. And that group of White Citizens Council, the Capitol Women's League, whatever the various groups, constantly stayed on him, and to change. See, another thing, University of Arkansas had already been, integrated. There were blacks who had gone to school there, albeit that there were some problems on occasion, but nothing like what took place in Little Rock. Segregated in their classroom, but they still went to school there. So there was some towns in Arkansas that had integrated school. Hoxie, Arkansas was one of them. They only had one school, and when that decision was passed in Washington at the Supreme Court, that school board said, well, hey, you know, we're going to have to abide by, and they went on and took their one school where the black kids were going to some, you know, rundown place on somebody's farm to go to school. They were allowed to go to the school. So there was history of schools of black and white kids going to school together in Arkansas prior to this. So no, we didn't expect that.
We've all seen the footage of what it was like when you were escorted by the 1,000 members of the United States Army and finally got in school. But what was it like once you got inside?
Well, we felt good that we had that protection, and they did take us into the school, and they stayed with us from one classroom to the next.
Did you each have a guard with you?
We all had a guard, and they stayed outside the classroom. They weren't allowed inside. Now, teenagers will be teenagers, and they found a way to do various things to us, I mean, including the guards. I mean, they caught some of the residual of, such as tomatoes being thrown at us, or ink being splattered on you, or, you know, as you're walking through the hallway. But then the same way, and you know, a number of us were tripped, kicked, pushed in the lockers, pushed down steps. You know, we all can tell a story about that.
Well,
so, you know, even though you do have a guard, and I do kind of talk about, and all the things that took place in the classroom, you know, depending on what type of teacher you had. If you had a teacher that had some moxie and was a disciplined teacher, might be able to keep that classroom under control. If you had one who was a new teacher or what have you, and just trying to get, you just don't know what will happen. And I had a little bit of both. But you know, they would put glue in the seats, you know, gum in the seats. I mean, you learn how to do various things for defensive measures.
Well, they would walk on your heels,
Yes.
and that was the part, I guess, that hurt me so much in reading the book. And then instead of giving up, a lot of children and their parents would say, you know, just we're pulling out.
Right.
You brought Band-Aids and socks and everything, and you just came each day prepared.
And my other little technique was this. I figured if you're going to walk on the back of my heels, you're going to work for it. And so I walked fast. And that was my defensive mechanism. And then if I felt like she was still there, I'd stop dead and she'd run into the back of me. Okay? So, you know, it was those sort of things that I would do. But then that I now understand why I had a different guard every Monday morning. I wore them out.
Well, here's the next incredible part of this story is then the next year, Faubus closes the school.
Can you imagine?
No. I mean, today that would just be an outrage. It closed the school, so you had to study just to keep it from being integrated, and you studied at home. How did you keep up with your studies? How did you keep your spirits up?
Well, it was difficult. I mean, but I think there's a point here. 3,600 students in the city of Little Rock, black and white, had no high school to go to.
That's just incredible.
You have to say that the man was crazy, you know.
Well, of course.
But I took correspondence courses because there were some schools that popped up, but they were flying their Confederate flag, so you know who that school was for.
Of course, yes.
For black kids, a lot of them, those at Horseman, either went to North Little Rock, which was a different school system, or country schools outside of Little Rock, or they left the city and went to live with extended family members, or the males joined the Army. And the same thing happened with white kids, too, if they didn't go to that school that was not even, it really didn't have the accreditation, North Central accreditation, but, you know, it was strictly for white kids, okay? For me, I took correspondence courses through the University of Arkansas.
And you were eventually able to return to Central, and only
Right.
you and 2 others of the original 9.
No, one other.
One other,
Jefferson Thomas.
Jefferson, who just recently passed,
Yes.
and all of that. You went back to school. Had things changed much? Was the mood better at all?
Well, what I can say about 59, 60, as opposed to 57, 58, the change of leadership. See, those kids were sophomores with me, now seniors with me. And they had gone through that year of schools being closed. And I think that they made a pact among themselves that we are going to have something to say about, or try to keep the thuggery and those types of people in check as much as possible. So I think that they really did try. Things still took place. There's no question about it. But we didn't have guards, so we were really on our own.
Were you scared?
No, my scariest day was September 23rd, 1957, and that was the day when the police could not control the mob outside. So that day was my scariest. I think it was being naive. I think it was also being a teenager who felt like she was invincible. You know, kids are like that.
Well, yeah, and then to see some of the things that you saw your fellow student, your sister student, Minnie Jean Brown,
Right,
and
being
she,
expelled.
and she'd been taunted and accidentally, I guess,
Right.
dropped a bowl of chili, and the
Right.
next thing she's expelled.
Right.
And that's the message that sent to you was
That if you retaliate, now see, those things we had been told initially when it was 39 kids out of the 117 that had signed up. 39 were selected by the whatever committee that the school board had put together, and we heard at that meeting that you could not retaliate, and you could not participate in any extracurricular activity. You couldn't do any of the things that you would normally do in a high school. All you could do is go to school. So yes, a message was sent that if you do these sort of things, this is what could happen. So I surely, I went back because I needed that diploma to validate all that I had gone through in 1957, 58. So I wanted to graduate from there. I mean, I had made a commitment to go to high school there. And that's kind of how I was taught at home, that once you make a commitment, you see it through. But I do believe that I could have finished that year, and if I didn't want to go back, I didn't have to. I think my parents would have looked at it that way.
What made you decide to write your story now after all these years?
Melba Beals had written a book, Warriors Don't Cry. Mrs. Huckabee, who was the vice principal, had a movie called Crisis at Central High. Ernest Green had a documentary on the Disney Channel, Disney World. Disney did, and it's called The Ernie Green Story. And after the 30th anniversary, I found myself going to high schools and colleges talking about the times. And they all thought, anyone who knew any of those thought that it was my story as well, if they had read or had seen the movies. And 9 of us went to school in 57, 58. There are 9 stories, none greater or lesser than the other, but different. And I felt like I needed to tell my story. And I was always signing Melba's book, too. And I would call her and say, hey, I signed another one of your books. I've got to get one out of my own. But anyway, 2006 came around, and I started writing it, thinking that I could have it out for the 50th anniversary in September of 2007. Not understanding the publishing business. It was not meant to be. I kind of missed that date by a couple of years. But it was 2 reasons. I wanted my story out, and I also wanted to vindicate my neighbor up the street who had been accused and had spent 2 years of a 5-year sentence for bombing my home. And I knew he hadn't done it. And I wanted him a part of my book. And I I wanted kids to be able to understand that time in our history. I was finding students in high school and college who knew nothing about this time in history, and that disturbed me. And I thought, sure, writing my memoir would, hopefully, if I could get it into the schools, that as a read, that it would be helpful to social science teachers, history teachers, civic teachers, whatever.
Was it healing for you to write the book?
Yes, I didn't know that that was going to be the case, but it was very cathartic, and it was helpful.
We're showing a picture of President Clinton presenting your group with the Congressional Gold Medal.
Yes.
We just have under a minute left. What was that moment like?
That was just unbelievable, and it was quite moving because we had our families there.
Yes.
Those that were still alive. And I like to say that the real heroes and sheroes were really our parents, because I didn't really understand that until I became a parent. You started out the interview with about what it was like for my parents, and I really think that we all owe a lot of gratitude to them, because you're at home not knowing what's happening at school for your child, and then to hear the things on the radio and the TV had to have been very hard on them. So to have them at the White House, and to have your sisters and your children and so forth to witness this was just wonderful. And the reason President Clinton was allowed to give it to us, because this is a congressional gold medal. This takes place in Congress. But because of our relationship with him, they allowed him to present it to us, and a number of congressmen were there in witness. Yes.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Carlotta.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.